Hello again. Unless you work in a school or make a point of visiting the local children's library, then it's quite likely that you will not realise how utterly weird are many of the books to which children are now routinely exposed. I've spoken here of one or two instances of particularly odd children's books that I've come across. The other day I discussed a book published this year in Britain which showed black people outnumbering white by 7-1. The impression one has is that this is intended to normalise such a state of affairs for children. In other words, to prepare them. It bears not the slightest resemblance to Britain as it really is today, where visible minorities are actually outnumbered 6-1 by white people. But maybe this is how the writers of such books, and incidentally, of course, the producers of television programmes and advertisements, think that things will be, or perhaps should be. Just as children's books show how the future might be, so too are they provided with a strange vision of the past. We've seen how black people are included by the BBC in children's programmes like the Horrible History series, which shows Roman Britain and Tudor England as having many black people knocking about. This is to make black school children feel better about themselves, which is a worthy enough aim, I suppose, in itself. The whole idea has been taken to its logical conclusion in this book, called Meet the Ancient Romans, which is about ancient Rome. In this book, every single person in ancient Rome is black. What, you don't believe me? Well, look for yourself. Here's ancient Roman families at home. Oh yes, here's the Roman army. Every single person here is black. Roman workers. It seems from these illustrations that there was not a single black person in ancient Rome. One problem I do have with these illustrations, by the way, is that they put me in mind of a certain type of child's doll, which was based upon the terribly offensive stereotypes, of course, and sometimes featured in stories by Enid Blyton. Have a look at these people here, for example. I'm sure older readers will know what I mean, but anybody remember the figures associated with Robinson's jam? In my ceaseless quest for information, I contacted the Bonnier Publishing Group in London, who published this odd book, and asked what the idea was behind it. But they said they didn't think it mattered if the people in the illustrations were black or white, which struck me as implausible. The other book I've been looking at is this one, called Big Ideas for Young Thinkers. The method of putting across propaganda here is a little more subtle. It's done by simply including a black person every time a white person is mentioned for balance, and so giving the idea that black people have played just as great a role in the history of philosophy, religion, art, science, ethics and so on as white people, which is quite false, of course. Here on page 32, the big question now is God real? I wonder if everyone can see that with the two people there. You see what's been done here? Karl Marx is one of the greatest political thinkers and philosophers of the 19th century, and his works have changed the world. Maya Angelou, on the other hand, was a novelist and poet. She wrote some good stuff, but to compare her as a thinker with Marx is simply grotesque. Children, though, seeing the two people given equal billing like that, will absorb the idea that Michelangelo is as important as Marx. We've got here, let's have a look, on page 16, the question, is race real? No prizes for guessing how this is answered. Although we can see clear differences between how some groups of people look, race is not biological, scientific or real. Race is an illusion that humans have historically turned into reality. Yeah, well, that's not altogether accurate, I'm afraid. On page 48, which really made me laugh, we see Leonardo da Vinci and Marcus Garvey together, as though they are both as important in the history of thought. Let me explain what's happening here. The entire culture of Europe and the United States is based solely upon the achievements of white people. This began with the Romans and Greeks, continued through the Renaissance, and then into the Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution. All the original thought, books, art, inventions, scientific discoveries and so on were the product of white people, and black Africans and people of black African heritage had no part in them at all. This is quite an unpalatable thought and makes black people feel a bit left out, and so a new version of history is being created in which ancient Rome was as black as Africa, and the contributions which black people made to philosophy and science were on a par with those made by white people. It's not true, of course, but if we start telling children this fairy tale when they're young enough, many of them will believe it. At the very least, it will make black children feel better about themselves. This is why we are seeing books produced for children which show Greece and Rome as having been entirely black civilizations, and others which pretend that Marcus Garvey was somehow as great a person as Leonardo da Vinci. It is this false vision of the past which is now being taught in schools, both in Britain and the United States.